The courtroom fell silent as 6-year-old Marcus Jackson rose from his seat. With shoulders squared and voice unwavering, he addressed Judge Harrington directly. Your Honor, before you evict us, you should know Section 42 U.S.C. 3604 prohibits discrimination, and I have proof my mother applied for repairs 17 times. Stunned gasps erupted. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of extraordinary courage in the face of injustice. Now let's rewind to see how this remarkable young boy became the unexpected hero his mother desperately needed. Marcus Jackson skipped alongside his mother, Shanice, as they walked home from Westside Elementary School. His science fair project on water filtration had won first place, and the blue ribbon pinned to his shirt fluttered in the autumn breeze. At just 6 years old, Marcus had already developed a reputation as the smartest kid in his grade. His teacher, Miss Peterson, often said he had the mind of someone 3 times his age. "Mom, can we put my ribbon on the fridge next to my math test?" Marcus asked, his gap-toothed smile beaming with pride. Shanice Jackson looked down at her son momentarily, forgetting the exhaustion from her 12-hour night shift at Memorial Hospital. As a single mother and registered nurse, she worked double shifts most days to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. "Of course we can, baby. I'm so proud of you," she said, ruffling his curly hair. Their moment of joy evaporated the instant they reached the 3rd floor of their apartment building in Westview Heights. A bright yellow notice was taped prominently to their door. Shanice froze mid-step, her hand instinctively reaching for the paper while pulling Marcus closer to her side. Eviction notice. Read the bold black letters at the top of the form. You are hereby notified to vacate the premises within 30 days due to violation of lease terms. Shanice's hands began to shake as she continued reading. According to the notice, they were being evicted due to property damage and unauthorized modifications, accusations that made absolutely no sense. "Mom, what's wrong?" Marcus asked, his small face crumpling with concern as he watched tears well in his mother's eyes. Shanice quickly wiped them away and unlocked their apartment door. The familiar smell of mold immediately greeted them, the same black mold that had been spreading across their bathroom ceiling for months, despite her numerous complaints to management. Shanice guided Marcus to the kitchen table and tried to compose herself. "Remember how our ceiling keeps leaking in the bathroom, and those dark spots keep coming back," she explained as gently as possible. "I've been asking Mr. Caldwell to fix it for months, but he never does. Now they're saying we damaged the apartment and have to leave." Marcus looked around at their small but meticulously clean 2-bedroom apartment. The only modifications were the plastic buckets strategically placed to catch water from the leaking ceiling and the shower curtain taped around the worst part of the bathroom wall to contain the mold. Shanice pulled out a thick folder from her desk drawer. Every maintenance request she'd submitted since the problems began 8 months ago. Each form was dated with her signature and a brief description of the issue. Some even included photographs. All 17 requests had been stamped, received by the Property Management Office, but none had been addressed. Meanwhile, she had watched as their white neighbors' maintenance issues were resolved within days. Just last week, the Henderson family's dishwasher had been replaced within 24 hours of their complaint. "I don't understand," Shanice whispered more to herself than to Marcus. "We've done everything right." Her voice cracked as the weight of their situation sank in. "We can't afford another security deposit right now. Where will we go?" Marcus wrapped his small arms around his mother's waist. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll figure it out," he said, with a conviction that belied his years. As Shanice called the Property Management Office, Marcus wandered to their living room window. Below, he could see Mr. Caldwell, the white property manager, laughing with a group of men in suits as they surveyed the building. Marcus had noticed how Mr. Caldwell's smile always disappeared whenever he saw Shanice or their other black neighbors. Later that evening, as Shanice prepared dinner, there was a knock at their door. It was Mrs. Washington, from apartment 312, an elderly woman who had lived in the building for over 20 years. "I heard about your notice," she said, her voice low. "You're not the only one, child. The Johnsons on the 2nd floor got one yesterday. The Thompsons last week. Notice a pattern: all black families, all in the East Wing." Mrs. Washington handed Shanice a newspaper clipping. "Value Corp Properties just bought this whole building last year. Word is they're trying to upgrade the tenant profile. That's code for getting us all out so they can renovate and double the rent." As Marcus helped set the table, he overheard Mrs. Washington explaining how the pattern was clear. Maintenance requests from black tenants were being systematically ignored, creating conditions that could later be used as justification for eviction. The next morning, Shanice called the local legal aid office, desperation evident in her voice. "I'm sorry, Miss Jackson, but we're severely understaffed," the intake coordinator explained. "The earliest we could get you in would be 6 weeks from now, but we only have 30 days before we're evicted," Shanice pleaded. "Isn't there anything you can do?" "You can request a court hearing to contest the eviction," the coordinator suggested. "But honestly, without legal representation, your chances aren't good, especially against Value Corp. They have a team of attorneys for these situations." After hanging up, Shanice buried her face in her hands. Marcus stood in the hallway, clutching his blue science fair ribbon. In that moment, something shifted in his young mind. If the adults couldn't help, maybe he could find a way. After all, hadn't his teacher always said he had a special gift for learning things quickly? That evening, as Shanice slept, following another double shift, Marcus carefully opened the folder of maintenance requests. He studied each form, each photograph, and each ignored plea for help. In his mind, a plan began to take shape. He might be just 6 years old, but he was his mother's son, and he wasn't going to let her fight this battle alone. The following Monday after school, instead of going to Mrs. Jefferson's apartment, where he usually waited until his mother finished her shift, Marcus told his teacher he was meeting his mom at the public library. It wasn't exactly a lie. They would eventually meet there when she picked him up. What he didn't mention was that his mother had no idea about his new after-school destination. The Jefferson Heights Public Library was a 15-minute walk from school. Marcus had only been there twice before on field trips, but he remembered the layout well. The children's section was bright and inviting, but he walked straight past it, heading instead toward the reference section. A petite, elderly woman with silver-rimmed glasses looked up from the reference desk, surprise, crossing her features as she noticed Marcus approaching by himself. "Hello there, young man. Are you lost?" she asked kindly. "No, ma'am," Marcus replied politely. "I need to learn about housing laws. Where would I find books about that?" The librarian, Mrs. Chen, according to her name badge, raised her eyebrows. "Housing laws. That's an unusual interest for someone your age. Is this for a school project?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. It seemed easier than explaining the truth. "Well, most of our legal resources are quite advanced," Mrs. Chen explained, "but I think I might have something that could help you." She led him to a shelf labeled Legal Self-Help and pulled down a book titled Know Your Rights Housing Edition. The cover featured a simplified illustration of an apartment building. "This is written for the general public, so the language is more accessible," she explained. "Why don't you start with this? If you need more help, I'd be happy to assist you." For the next 2 hours, Marcus sat at a corner table, slowly working his way through the book. Many of the words were new to him, but he kept his tablet nearby, looking up terms he didn't understand. By the time Shanice arrived to pick him up, he had filled 3 pages of his school notebook with carefully printed notes. "How was Mrs. Jefferson's?" Shanice asked as they walked home. "Fine," Marcus answered, feeling a twinge of guilt at the lie. "We did homework." "That's good, baby." "I'm sorry I have to work so much," she said, squeezing his hand. "It's okay, Mom. I understand." And he did understand, more than most children his age. He understood that his mother had been working extra shifts at the hospital, picking up every available hour to save money for whatever might come next. He understood that the dark circles under her eyes weren't just from physical exhaustion, but from the weight of worry she carried. 2 years ago, when his father had died unexpectedly from a heart attack, Marcus had watched his mother rebuild their lives piece by piece. "Knowledge is your shield," his father had often told him. "No one can take that away from you." Now those words echoed in his mind with new meaning. The next day, Marcus returned to the library. "Mrs. Chen greeted him with a warm smile and had already set aside several resources she thought might help with his project. Among them was a simplified guide to tenant rights in their state and a children's book about famous court cases that had changed American laws. Day after day, Marcus continued his secret education. He learned about housing discrimination laws, the Fair Housing Act, and what constituted illegal eviction practices. He discovered terms like constructive eviction, when landlords intentionally make living conditions so unbearable that tenants are forced to leave, and realized this might be exactly what was happening to them and their neighbors. During this time, Shanice continued her desperate search for help. She called every legal aid society within 50 miles, but the story was always the same. They were either at capacity or couldn't help in time. Meanwhile, Marcus's research expanded. He began eavesdropping on conversations at the laundromat in their building where other tenants shared similar experiences. Mrs. Thompson from the second floor mentioned how her repeated requests to fix her heating had been ignored all winter. Mr. Davis from apartment 221 described how maintenance had fixed his white neighbor's garbage disposal the same day it broke, while his own request had been pending for 3 months. Using his tablet, Marcus secretly recorded these conversations after learning about one-party consent laws and collected contact information. He created a simple spreadsheet tracking each family's maintenance issues when they were reported and whether they were fixed. A pattern quickly emerged. White tenants' issues were addressed promptly while black tenants' requests languished indefinitely. During his research, Marcus also discovered that Value Corp properties had been accused of similar discriminatory practices in other neighborhoods across the city. Articles from local newspapers described how predominantly black apartment complexes purchased by Value Corp suddenly experienced mass evictions, followed by renovations and rent increases that effectively prevented former tenants from returning. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus witnessed firsthand what his research had already suggested. From the playground outside their building, he watched as maintenance workers promptly responded to a call from the Miller's apartment, a white family who had moved in just 2 months ago. Within hours, their leaking kitchen faucet had been replaced. That same day, Mrs. Washington had waited 4 hours for someone to look at her broken air conditioning, only to be told they would put it on the list. Marcus was so focused on documenting this incident on his tablet that he didn't notice Mr. Caldwell approaching until his shadow fell across the screen. "What do you think you're doing, kid?" the property manager demanded, his face twisted in suspicion. Marcus quickly closed his notes app. "Just playing games, sir," he answered, heart-pounding. Mr. Caldwell snatched the tablet from his hands, but the screen had already locked. "Your mother better watch herself," he said, returning the device with a sneer. "I hear the hospital's looking to cut staff. Would be a shame if they got a call about an employee who can't even control her kid." The threat was clear, and it terrified Marcus, but rather than deterring him, it only strengthened his resolve. That night, as his mother slept, Marcus lay awake thinking about everything he'd learned. In just 2 weeks, they would have to appear in housing court to contest their eviction. His mother didn't know it yet, but they wouldn't be going alone. Marcus would be bringing 3 weeks' worth of research evidence and a determination that belied his 6 years. The following Monday morning, Shanice took a rare day off from work to visit the Westview Heights management office. Marcus begged to come along, claiming he didn't feel well enough for school. Reluctantly, Shanice agreed, unaware that her son had his own reasons for wanting to witness the meeting. The management office was located in a renovated apartment on the first floor. A sleek sign reading Value Corp Properties had replaced the old Westview Heights placard that had hung there for decades. Inside, the space had been transformed with modern furniture and minimalist decor, a stark contrast to the aging conditions in many of the tenants' apartments. The receptionist, a young white woman with a permanent smile, looked up as they entered. "How can I help you?" she asked, her eyes briefly registering surprise at Shanice's rumpled nurse's scrubs before shifting to a more neutral expression. "I need to speak with Mr. Caldwell about this," Shanice said, placing the eviction notice on the counter. "It's a mistake. We haven't violated our lease, Mr. Caldwell is very busy this morning." The receptionist responded without checking any schedule. "You can fill out this appeal form and someone will contact you within 5 to 7 business days." "We don't have 5 to 7 days, Shanice insisted, her voice rising slightly. "The notice says we have to be out in less than 3 weeks now. I've been trying to get maintenance to fix our bathroom for 8 months. The ceiling is literally falling apart with mold." The receptionist's smile remained fixed. "As I said, you can fill out an appeal form." Before Shanice could respond, the office door opened and Richard Caldwell emerged. His eyebrows raised slightly at the sight of Shanice and Marcus. "Is there a problem here, Jessica?" he asked the receptionist without acknowledging their presence directly. "Miss Jackson wants to discuss her eviction notice," Jessica replied. "I've offered her an appeal form." Caldwell finally turned to face them, his expression revealing nothing. "Miss Jackson, I'm afraid the decision is final. Your unit has extensive water damage and mold, which constitutes a violation of your lease agreement. That damage exists because you ignored my maintenance requests," Shanice countered, pulling out her folder of documentation. "I have copies of 17 separate requests I've submitted since January. You've fixed nothing." Caldwell barely glanced at the folder. Our records show only 2 requests, both of which were addressed promptly. If you'd kept your bathroom properly ventilated as specified in your lease, the mold wouldn't have developed. Marcus watched this exchange with growing anger. He knew Mr. A.T. Caldwell was lying. He had seen all 17 stamped maintenance requests in his mother's folder. "That's not true," Shanice insisted. "I have proof right here, miss." Jackson Caldwell said, his tone shifting to one of condescension. "Perhaps your living habits have contributed to the problem. Some people simply don't understand how to properly maintain a home." The racial undertone in his comment was unmistakable. Marcus saw his mother flinch as if she'd been slapped. The Hendersons had their dishwasher replaced the day after they complained. Marcus blurted out, unable to contain himself. "And they're white." "Is that just a coincidence?" Caldwell's face hardened as he looked down at Marcus. "I suggest you teach your son some manners, Miss Jackson. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do." He turned and walked back into his office, closing the door firmly behind him. The receptionist slid an appeal form across the counter. "You can leave this in the drop box when you're finished," she said before returning to her computer. Outside the office, Shanice leaned against the wall, her hands shaking with anger and frustration. "I can't believe he said that to us," she whispered. "Did you hear him?" Marcus nodded, taking his mother's hand. "We should go to the housing authority," he suggested, recalling information from his research. "They're supposed to help with discrimination." The city housing authority office was located downtown, a 30-minute bus ride from their apartment. By the time they arrived, the waiting room was already full of people, many of whom looked as desperate and frustrated as Shanice. After taking a number, they waited 3 hours before being called to a cubicle where an overworked civil servant barely looked up from his computer. "Eviction notice?" he asked, holding out his hand for their paperwork. Shanice explained their situation in detail, emphasizing the ignored maintenance requests and the pattern of discrimination she'd observed. The housing authority representative, Mr. Patel, typed notes as she spoke, his expression revealing nothing. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Jackson," he finally said, "while you can file a discrimination complaint with us, the investigation process takes 4 to 6 months. It won't stop your current eviction proceedings." 6 months, Shanice repeated in disbelief. "We have less than 3 weeks. You can request an emergency hearing with the housing court." Mr. Patel suggested printing out yet another form. "But I should warn you, without legal representation, these cases rarely succeed against corporate landlords." The following day, they visited the legal aid center that had previously told them they couldn't help for 6 weeks. Marcus insisted on coming along, saying he wanted to support his mom. The waiting room was crowded with families in similar situations, many clutching eviction notices of their own. After a 2-hour wait, they were finally seen by a harried-looking attorney named Miss Rodriguez. "I remember your call, Miss Jackson," she said after reviewing their case. "I wish I had better news, but we simply don't have the resources to take on another case right now, especially against Value Corp. They're known for dragging out proceedings until tenants give up or run out of money. But there has to be something we can do," Shanice pleaded. "They're discriminating against us and other black families in the building." Miss Rodriguez's expression softened. "I believe you, and what they're doing is wrong. But proving housing discrimination in court is incredibly difficult without substantial evidence and expert testimony." "We have evidence," Marcus spoke up, pulling his tablet from his backpack. "I've been collecting it." Both women turned to look at him in surprise as he opened his carefully organized files. Miss Rodriguez reviewed Marcus's documentation with growing astonishment. "This island, impressive," she admitted, "especially coming from someone so young. But I'm afraid it still might not be enough in court without expert witnesses and legal arguments." She paused, then added reluctantly, "And no judge is going to take evidence presented by a child seriously." As they left the legal aid office, Shanice received a text message that made her stop in her tracks. "They've moved up our court date," she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "It's next week now instead of 3 weeks from now." That same afternoon, while researching the judge assigned to their case, Marcus made a disturbing discovery. Judge William Harrington had social connections with William Preston, the CEO of Value Corp Properties. Photos on social media showed them together at charity golf tournaments and social events. It wasn't definitive proof of bias, but it certainly suggested their case might not receive a fair hearing. The final blow came that evening when Shanice received a call from her supervisor at the hospital. "Someone's been calling the HR department questioning your reliability," she explained. "They mentioned your housing situation and suggested you might be too stressed to perform your duties safely." Shanice was horrified. That's ridiculous. I've never had a single complaint about my work. I know that her supervisor assured her. I've defended you, but just be aware that someone's trying to cause trouble. The next morning, they discovered their car had been vandalized in the apartment parking lot. Someone had scratched "Just Leave" across the driver's side door. Shanice called the police, but the responding officer merely shrugged and said there was little they could do without witnesses or surveillance footage. "What's happening to us, Mom?" Marcus asked as they covered the scratches with tape. "Why are they doing this?" Shanice pulled him into a tight hug. "Sometimes people do cruel things when they want something you have, baby. They want our home so they can make more money. But we're not giving up without a fight." That evening, they attended a community meeting organized by Mrs. Washington in the building's small community room. Over 20 families showed up, most of them Black or Hispanic, and nearly all had experienced similar issues with maintenance requests being ignored or receiving unwarranted lease violation notices. "They're pushing us out one by one," Mrs. Washington explained to the group. "First, they neglect repairs until our homes become unlivable. Then they blame us for the conditions and evict us. Meanwhile, the few white tenants get royal treatment." Marcus listened intently as family after family shared experiences nearly identical to theirs. He quietly collected contact information from everyone willing to share their stories. After the meeting, he secretly emailed a fair housing advocacy group he'd found online, attaching some of his evidence and explaining their situation. The response came the next morning. They were interested in investigating Value Corp's practices, but their legal team was currently tied up with another major case. They couldn't help in time for Shanice's court date, but promised to look into the broader pattern of discrimination. "Do you think Marcus's evidence collection will make a difference in court?" Comment number 1, if you believe a 6-year-old's research could stand up against corporate lawyers. Or number 2, if you think the system is too stacked against them. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see how this brave young boy continues fighting for justice. With their court date now just 5 days away, and every avenue of adult assistance exhausted, what strategy could possibly save them from eviction? Let's find out in the next part of this incredible true story. With their court date rapidly approaching and no legal representation, Marcus knew he needed to take drastic action. After school the next day, he returned to the library where Mrs. Chen had become a trusted ally in his research. "I need books about how to present in court," Marcus explained, his small face etched with determination. "My mom and I have to go to housing court on Monday." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Marcus, are you saying you're planning to help represent your mother in actual court?" Marcus nodded solemnly. "No one else will help us. I've learned a lot, Mrs. Chen. I know about the Fair Housing Act and constructive eviction. I know they're discriminating against us because we're Black." The elderly librarian sat down next to him, choosing her words carefully. "What you're attempting is very unusual, Marcus. Courts generally don't allow children to act as advocates, especially in legal proceedings." "I'm not trying to be a lawyer," Marcus clarified, "but I can help my mom organize our evidence and understand what to say." Mrs. Chen studied him thoughtfully before nodding. "All right then, let's find you some resources on court procedures and housing discrimination cases." For the next 2 hours, they reviewed simplified legal guides and watched videos of housing court proceedings. Marcus took meticulous notes, organizing the information into a simple structure that made sense to him. He created a presentation outline modeled after the science fair projects he excelled at: problem, evidence, conclusion. That evening, while Shanice worked another night shift, Marcus stood before the bathroom mirror, practicing his arguments. "Your Honor," he began, his voice wavering slightly. "Section 42 U.S.C. 3604 of the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in the terms, conditions, or privileges of rental of a dwelling because of race." He stumbled over the legal terminology, practicing the phrase repeatedly until it flowed naturally from his lips. He arranged their evidence chronologically: the 17 maintenance requests, photos of the deteriorating bathroom ceiling, recordings of conversations with other tenants, and his spreadsheet comparing response times for white versus Black residents. By midnight, exhaustion overtook him and he fell asleep surrounded by his notes. When Shanice returned home at dawn, she found her son curled up on the couch, his tablet and papers spread around him. Curious, she picked up one of the pages, a neatly written outline titled, "Our Housing Discrimination Case." Her heart sank as she realized what Marcus had been doing. She gently woke him, concern etched across her tired face. Marcus, baby, what is all this? She asked, gesturing to the papers. Marcus rubbed his eyes and sat up. I'm helping us fight the eviction, Mom. I've been researching housing law and discrimination. I know how to prove what they're doing is illegal. Shanice's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Marcus, you shouldn't have to worry about these things. You're just a child. But I can help, he insisted, fully awake now. No one else is helping us. I've organized all our evidence. I know which laws they're breaking. Please, Mom, let me help. Shanice sat beside him, conflicted emotions playing across her face. The thought of her 6-year-old son taking on this adult burden broke her heart, yet the determination in his eyes reminded her so much of his father. After a long silence, she pulled him into a tight hug. Show me what you found, she finally said. For the next hour, Marcus walked her through his research and evidence collection. He explained about constructive eviction, the Fair Housing Act, and the pattern of discrimination he'd documented. Shanice listened with growing amazement at her son's thoroughness and understanding. How did you learn all this? She asked. Mrs. Chen at the library helped me find books, and I watched videos online about housing court, he explained. Mrs. Chen says I'm a fast learner. Reluctantly, Shanice agreed to let Marcus help prepare their case, though she insisted she would do most of the talking in court. Together, they visited the courthouse that Friday to familiarize themselves with the layout and procedures. The imposing stone building intimidated even Shanice, but Marcus approached the information desk confidently. We're here to learn about housing court procedures, he announced to the clerk behind the counter. The white woman looked down at him with surprise, then at Shanice with thinly veiled contempt. Housing court is on the 3rd floor, she said curtly. But children aren't allowed in the courtroom unless they're directly involved in the case. He'll be with me, Shanice explained. We have a hearing on Monday. The clerk raised an eyebrow. Do you have an attorney representing you? When Shanice shook her head, the clerk's expression shifted to something between pity and dismissal. Good luck with that, she muttered, already turning her attention to the next person in line. As they explored the building, they encountered an elderly black man mopping the hallway floor. His name tag identified him as Joseph Turner, and he smiled warmly at Marcus. First time in court, young man, he asked. Yes, sir, Marcus replied. We're fighting an eviction on Monday. Mr. Turner stopped mopping and leaned on his mop handle. Housing court, huh? Judge Harrington's courtroom. When they nodded, he shook his head slightly. Been working here 30 years. Seen a lot of cases come and go. Harrington can be tough, especially with folks representing themselves. He lowered his voice. Particularly tough on certain folks, if you catch my meaning. We've noticed, Shanice said quietly. Mr. Turner studied them thoughtfully. My advice, be respectful but firm. Have your evidence well organized. And don't let them rush you. They'll try to push through your case in 5 minutes if you let them. He paused, then added, and make sure all your evidence is submitted to the court clerk by 3 p.m. today. Harrington's strict about the 24-hour rule for evidence submission. Shanice's eyes widened in alarm. Today? No one told us that. They often don't, Mr. Turner said with a knowing look. Good luck to you both. I'll be pulling for you on Monday. With this new deadline looming, Shanice and Marcus rushed to the court clerk's office to submit their evidence. The clerk seemed surprised by the volume and organization of their materials, but accepted the submission without comment. That evening, they worked frantically to finalize their presentation strategy. Shanice would introduce their case, and Marcus would help present specific evidence if needed. They rehearsed their arguments late into the night, refining their approach and anticipating potential questions from the judge or Value Corp's attorneys. Neither got much sleep that weekend. By Monday morning, the physical toll of their stress was evident. Shanice's eyes were rimmed with dark circles, and even Marcus's usual boundless energy seemed diminished. They dressed in their best clothes, Shanice in a conservative navy dress she normally reserved for church, and Marcus in khaki pants and a button-down shirt that had been his father's favorite. You look so handsome, Shanice said, adjusting his collar. Just like your daddy. Marcus straightened his shoulders at the comparison. We're going to win, Mom, he said, with conviction that brought fresh tears to Shanice's eyes. When they arrived at the courthouse, they were stunned to find a security guard blocking their path. Children aren't allowed in housing court, he stated firmly. Court policy. But he's part of our case, Shanice protested. We're contesting an eviction that affects him too. The guard remained unmoved. Rules are rules, ma'am. You'll need to find someone to watch him while you attend your hearing. Panic rose in Shanice's chest. They had no family nearby, and all their neighbors were working. More importantly, they had prepared their case together. She needed Marcus's knowledge of their evidence. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, a familiar voice spoke from behind them. "The child is a material witness in the case," Mr. Turner said, approaching in his courthouse maintenance uniform. Judge Harrington himself signed an exception last week. He handed the guard a form that Marcus recognized had not existed moments before. The guard examined the paper, frowned, then reluctantly stepped aside. "Thank you," Shanice whispered to Mr. Turner as they passed. He winked at Marcus. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Maintaining the order of things." As they climbed the stairs to the third-floor courtroom, Marcus squeezed his mother's hand. "We can do this, Mom," he said, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. Shanice squeezed back, drawing strength from her son's extraordinary courage. "Yes, we can," she agreed, pushing open the heavy wooden doors to face whatever awaited them inside. Courtroom 3, on the third floor of the Jefferson County Courthouse, buzzed with quiet tension as Shanice and Marcus entered. The space was imposing with its high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and rows of polished benches. At the front, an elevated bench awaited Judge Harrington, with the American flag and state flag flanking it on either side. To the right sat a long table where 3 impeccably dressed white attorneys arranged documents with practiced efficiency. Their matching leather briefcases displayed the Value Corp logo in gleaming silver. "That's them," Shanice whispered to Marcus. "Value Corp's lawyers." Marcus nodded, taking in the scene with wide eyes. He'd watched videos of courtrooms, but nothing had prepared him for the intimidating reality. Several other people occupied the benches, mostly minorities clutching similar eviction notices, all waiting their turn before the judge. A court officer approached them. "Name and case number?" he asked brusquely. "Shanice Jackson," she replied. "Case JH 2345. The officer checked his list. "Take a seat in the first row. You're third on the docket." As they made their way to the designated bench, Shanice felt the Value Corp attorney's eyes following them. One of them, a sharp-featured man with silver hair, leaned over to whisper something to his colleagues. They glanced at Marcus and smirked. Shanice squeezed her son's hand protectively. At precisely 9 a.m., a side door opened, and the bailiff stood. "All rise," he commanded. The Honorable Judge William Harrington presiding. Everyone in the courtroom stood as a stern-faced white man in his 60s entered wearing a black robe. Judge Harrington took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and surveyed the room with an expression of barely contained impatience. "Be seated," he said. "Let's make this efficient. I have 23 cases on today's docket. The first 2 cases proceeded with alarming speed. In each instance, tenants without legal representation stammered through confused explanations, while Value Corp's attorneys presented polished arguments. Judge Harrington interrupted the tenants frequently, but allowed the attorneys to speak unimpeded. Both cases ended with eviction orders in less than 10 minutes each. Next case, Judge Harrington announced. Value Corp Properties versus Jackson. Shanice rose on shaky legs, Marcus beside her. As they approached the podium, one of the Value Corp attorneys stood. "Your Honor, before we begin, I must object to the presence of a minor in these proceedings. This is a court of law, not a daycare center." Judge Harrington peered at Marcus over his reading glasses. "Is this your child, Miss Jackson?" "Yes, Your Honor," Shanice replied. "But he's not just here because I couldn't find childcare. He's directly affected by this eviction and has helped prepare our evidence. The court doesn't recognize children as legal advocates," the judge stated flatly. "He may remain if he stays silent and seated, but only you may address the court, Miss Jackson. Is that clear?" "Yes, Your Honor." Shanice replied, her voice stronger than she felt. The lead Value Corp attorney approached the bench. "Your Honor, I'm Thomas Bradford, representing Value Corp Properties. This is a straightforward lease violation case. The defendants have caused significant property damage through negligence and unauthorized modifications to their unit. We have documented 17 separate violations and have provided notice, according to state law. We're seeking immediate eviction and damages of $3,000 for repairs." Judge Harrington nodded. "Miss Jackson, what is your response to these allegations?" Shanice stepped forward, clutching her folder of evidence. "Your Honor, we categorically deny these allegations. The damage to our apartment was caused by Value Corp's neglect of necessary repairs despite our repeated requests. We have submitted evidence showing—" "Just answer the question, Miss Jackson," the judge interrupted. "Did you or did you not make modifications to the apartment?" Only to prevent further damage, Your Honor. Shanice explained, her voice beginning to waver under the judge's harsh gaze. We put up plastic sheeting to contain the mold after our repeated maintenance requests were ignored. We have copies of 17 maintenance requests that Your Honor Bradford interrupted smoothly. We have maintenance records showing only 2 requests from the Jackson unit, both of which were addressed within our standard 48-hour window. Any damage beyond that is the result of tenant negligence. That's not true, Shanice protested. I have stamped copies of all 17 requests right here. As she fumbled to retrieve the documents from her folder, her hands shaking with a combination of anger and nervousness, Judge Harrington sighed audibly. Miss Jackson, we don't have all day. Did you install plastic sheeting in the bathroom? Yes, but... And did you place unauthorized receptacles throughout the apartment to catch leaking water? They were buckets to catch water from the ceiling that they refused to fix. The judge held up his hand. A simple yes or no will suffice, Miss Jackson. Then yes, Shanice said, frustration evident in her voice. But only because Your Honor Bradford interjected again, the lease clearly prohibits any modifications without written permission from management. The defendant has just admitted to violating these terms. Shanice felt the case slipping away from her. The careful preparation, the evidence they'd gathered, none of it seemed to matter in the face of the judge's evident bias and the attorney's practiced maneuvering. She glanced down at Marcus, whose face had grown increasingly troubled as he watched the proceedings. Suddenly he stood up. Your Honor, Marcus said, his clear voice cutting through the tension in the courtroom. May I please say something important? The bailiff moved forward as if to remove him, but Judge Harrington held up his hand, curiosity momentarily overriding his impatience. Young man, I've already explained that only your mother may address the court. But she's scared, Your Honor, Marcus replied earnestly, and they keep interrupting her before she can explain about the discrimination. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Harrington's eyebrows rose. Discrimination, Bradford quickly intervened. Your Honor, this is clearly a delaying tactic. There has been no mention of discrimination in any of the filed documents. Because we didn't know how to file those papers properly. Marcus persisted, stepping forward despite his mother's attempt to quiet him. But Section 42 U.S.C. 3604 of the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in the terms, conditions, or privileges of rental of a dwelling because of race. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harrington stared at Marcus' genuine surprise, replacing his previous dismissive expression. Young man, where did you learn about the Fair Housing Act? At the library, Your Honor, Marcus answered. Mrs. Chen helped me find books about housing law after Mr. Meyer. Caldwell ignored our bathroom ceiling for 8 months, but fixed the Hendersons' dishwasher the same day it broke. The Hendersons are white. We're black. Before the judge could respond, Bradford laughed dismissively. Your Honor, surely we're not going to take legal arguments from a child. This is absurd. What's absurd, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength, is that every black family in our building has maintenance requests ignored, while white tenants get same-day service. That's why there's mold in our bathroom. That's why we had to use buckets and plastic. We have proof. He pulled out his tablet. I made a spreadsheet showing response times for maintenance requests. White tenants' average response time, 24 hours. Black tenants' average response time, never, because they don't get fixed at all. Judge Harrington removed his glasses, clearly reassessing the situation before him. Miss Jackson, did you authorize your son to conduct this? Research, Shanice stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Marcus's shoulder. No, Your Honor. He did this on his own. But everything he's saying is true. We've been trying to get our bathroom ceiling fixed for 8 months. The mold is making us sick. Mr. Caldwell ignores us, then blames us for the damage. Judge Harrington was silent for a moment, then turned to the Value Corp attorneys. Mr. Bradford, how do you respond to these allegations? Bradford's confident demeanor faltered slightly. Your Honor, these are baseless accusations from a child with an active imagination. Value Corp has comprehensive maintenance records showing equitable response times for all tenants. I have those records here. We've submitted copies of all 17 maintenance requests with receipt stamps from Value Corp's office. Marcus interrupted. They're in the evidence package we submitted on Friday. You can compare the dates with our photographs showing the damage getting worse each month. The judge turned to his clerk. Do we have this evidence on file? The clerk nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The Jackson evidence package was submitted within the required 24-hour window. Judge Harrington frowned. I haven't seen this package. It wasn't included in your briefing materials this morning, the clerk explained, casting a suspicious glance toward the Value Corp attorneys. I'll retrieve it immediately. As the clerk left, an uncomfortable silence fell over the courtroom. Bradford conferred urgently with his colleagues, their previously confident expressions now concerned. When the clerk returned with a thick folder, Judge Harrington took time reviewing the contents while the courtroom waited. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he examined the documents. Mr. Bradford, he finally said, these maintenance requests appear to be properly submitted and documented. Can you explain why your records only show 2 requests when I'm looking at 17 stamped copies? Bradford cleared his throat. There must be some clerical error, Your Honor. I'd need to consult with our property management team to clarify this discrepancy. At that moment, the courtroom door opened, and a man in a suit entered quietly, taking a seat in the back row. Marcus recognized him as the housing inspector who had briefly visited their bathroom 2 months ago, declared it not an emergency, and left without taking action. Judge Harrington noticed the new arrival as well. Mr. Reynolds, he acknowledged with surprise. Do you have business before this court today? The housing inspector stood. Your Honor, I'm here regarding the Jackson case. After receiving multiple complaints about conditions at Westview Heights, my office conducted a follow-up inspection this morning. I felt the findings might be relevant to today's proceedings. Bradford jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is completely irregular. The City Housing Authority has no standing in this eviction proceeding. On the contrary, Judge Harrington replied coolly, the court welcomes relevant information from city officials regarding housing code violations. Mr. Reynolds, please approach. As the housing inspector moved forward to speak privately with the judge, Bradford signaled urgently to someone on his team who quickly left the courtroom. The remaining Value Corp attorneys huddled in intense discussion. After several minutes of whispered conversation with the inspector, Judge Harrington addressed the courtroom. In light of new information, I'm calling a 30-minute recess. Court will resume at 11 a.m. As he rose to leave, he looked directly at Marcus. Young man, you and your mother should remain available. I may have questions for you when we reconvene. As the judge exited, the tension in the courtroom broke into a buzz of whispered conversations. Shanice pulled Marcus into a tight hug. I can't believe you did that, she whispered, her voice a mixture of pride and concern. You were amazing, but I was so scared when you stood up. Marcus hugged her back. I had to, Mom. They weren't listening to you. Bradford approached them, his previously dismissive manner replaced by a tight-lipped formality. Miss Jackson, I've been authorized to offer you a settlement. Value Corp will withdraw the eviction notice and pay for temporary housing while repairs are made to your unit. In exchange, we ask that you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding today's proceedings. Shanice hesitated the offer momentarily, tempting after weeks of stress and uncertainty. But Marcus tugged at her sleeve. Mom, he whispered, a non-disclosure agreement means we can't tell anyone what happened. What about Mrs. Washington and the other families? They need help too. Bradford's eyes narrowed at Marcus's interpretation. This offer is only on the table until court resumes, he stated coldly. I suggest you consider it carefully. As he walked away, Shanice looked down at her son with renewed determination. You're right, she said. This isn't just about us anymore. They returned to their seat, awaiting the judge's return, and whatever would come next in a battle that had suddenly shifted in ways none of them had anticipated. During the recess, the corridor outside courtroom 3 hummed with activity. Value Corp's attorneys huddled in intense discussion, occasionally casting wary glances toward Shanice and Marcus. The housing inspector, Mr. Courting, Reynolds, stood apart, reviewing documents and making calls. Marcus sat quietly beside his mother, observing everything with keen eyes that missed nothing. A slender white woman with a press badge approached them cautiously. Miss Jackson, I'm Nicole Washington from the Jefferson Herald. I was in court for another case but couldn't help noticing what happened in there. Would you mind telling me more about your situation? Shanice hesitated, but Marcus spoke up. They're discriminating against black families at our building. We have evidence. Nicole's interest visibly heightened. And you compiled this evidence yourself, she asked, looking directly at Marcus. That's quite remarkable for someone your age. Before Marcus could respond, the court reporter emerged from a side door and discreetly motioned them over. I shouldn't be doing this, she whispered when they approached. But I've been recording cases in Harrington's courtroom for 3 years. The Value Corp pattern is clear. 27 eviction cases against black tenants in the past 6 months, all with similar complaints about maintenance issues. Only 2 against white tenants during the same period. Shanice's eyes widened. Can you testify about this? The court reporter shook her head regretfully. I'd lose my job, but... She slipped Shanice a folded paper with a name and phone number. This attorney specializes in housing discrimination. Tell her Denise sent you. As they returned to the bench, Marcus noticed Bradford watching their interaction with the court reporter. The attorney's face darkened, and he immediately dispatched one of his colleagues back into the courtroom. 5 minutes before court was scheduled to reconvene, Bradford himself approached them again, this time with a different proposition. Miss Jackson Value Corp is prepared to be more generous. Full relocation expenses to any comparable apartment in the city, plus $10,000 compensation for your inconvenience. He slid a document across the bench. All you need to do is sign this agreement and drop any claims of discrimination. Marcus quickly scanned the dense legal text while his mother considered the offer. Mom, he whispered urgently, it says we have to withdraw all our evidence from the court record and never talk about Value Corp's maintenance practices again, and we have to sign right now before the judge comes back. Shanice frowned. That seems suspicious. Why the rush? It's a standard confidentiality clause, Bradford explained smoothly. The offer expires when court resumes. Just then, Mrs. Jefferson from their building hurried into the courtroom, spotting them immediately. Shanice Marcus, I came as soon as I heard. She clutched a folder of her own. I have copies of my maintenance requests, too. 15 ignored in 8 months, and photos of the mold in my kitchen. Bradford stepped between them. Ma'am, this is a private legal discussion. I must ask you to step away. 2 security guards appeared at Bradford's subtle signal. Mrs. Jefferson's courage visibly faltered as they approached. I'm sorry, she whispered to Shanice. They said they'd expedite my eviction if I got involved. She retreated to the back of the courtroom, head bowed in shame. All rise, the bailiff suddenly announced. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge William Harrington presiding. As everyone stood, Marcus noticed the courtroom had filled considerably during the recess. Nicole Washington had been joined by 2 other reporters. Several residents from their building had arrived, including Mrs. Washington. Even Mrs. Chen from the library sat quietly in the back row. Judge Harrington took his seat, his expression unreadable, as he surveyed the now crowded courtroom. Before we continue with Value Corp versus Jackson, I've reviewed the evidence submitted by the defendants, as well as the preliminary report from the housing inspector. He turned to the Value Corp table. Mr. Bradford, I find it troubling that these 17 maintenance requests were not included in your company's records. Can you explain this discrepancy? Bradford rose smoothly. Your Honor, after consultation with our property management team, we believe these may have been misfiled. However, this administrative error doesn't change the fact that the Jacksons made unauthorized modifications to their unit in violation of their lease. The judge frowned. A rather convenient misfiling, wouldn't you say? Especially since all 17 requests concern the same issue over an 8-month period. Before Bradford could respond, the courtroom doors opened again. A distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit entered, flanked by 2 additional attorneys. Marcus recognized him immediately from his research. William Preston, CEO of Value Corp Properties. Preston nodded to Bradford, who immediately yielded his position. Your Honor, Preston said with practiced authority. William Preston, Chief Executive of Value Corp. May I address the court? Judge Harrington's demeanor subtly shifted. Mr. Preston, this is unexpected. Yes, you may speak. Thank you, Your Honor. I've just been briefed on this situation and wanted to personally express Value Corp's commitment to fair housing practices. If there have been maintenance oversights at Westview Heights, I assure you they were not intentional or systemic. We're prepared to address the Jacksons' specific concerns immediately while maintaining that the lease violations are a separate matter. As Preston spoke, Marcus noticed one of the new attorneys sliding a folder to the judge's clerk, who quietly placed it on the judge's bench. Judge Harrington glanced at its contents, his expression momentarily revealing surprise before returning to its professional neutrality. Miss Jackson, the judge said, turning to Shanice. Given Mr. Preston's statement, are you satisfied that your maintenance concerns will be addressed? Shanice stood visibly intimidated by the sudden high-powered attention, but determined nonetheless. Your Honor, this isn't just about fixing our bathroom. This is about a pattern of discrimination affecting many families in our building. Objection. Preston interrupted smoothly. Miss Jackson is not qualified to allege systemic discrimination without expert testimony or statistical evidence. Actually, we do have evidence, Marcus said, standing beside his mother. He opened his tablet and walked toward the bench. I documented maintenance response times for every apartment in our building for the past 3 months. The average response time for white tenants is 24 hours. For black tenants, it's either never or more than 30 days. Judge Harrington examined the spreadsheet with raised eyebrows. And you compiled this yourself, young man? Yes, Your Honor, Marcus replied. And I recorded interviews with 15 families who had the same experience. Bradford quickly interjected. Your Honor, recordings made without consent are inadmissible in this state. Not if they were made in public spaces with one-party consent, Marcus countered confidently. I researched the law, and everyone I interviewed knew I was recording them. A murmur of surprise and appreciation rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge seemed momentarily impressed before composing his features. Nevertheless, Bradford continued, recovering quickly. The opinion of a 6-year-old child, however precocious, hardly constitutes expert testimony on housing discrimination. Just as the momentum seemed to be shifting back to Value Corp, the courtroom doors opened again. A middle-aged black woman entered hesitantly. Marcus recognized her immediately. Teresa Collins, who had worked in the Westview Heights management office until 2 months ago. Your Honor, she said in a shaky voice, my name is Teresa Collins. I was the assistant property manager at Westview Heights until I was fired in March. I have information relevant to this case. Preston's composed expression faltered for the first time. He whispered urgently to one of his attorneys, who immediately approached Miss Collins before she could reach the front of the courtroom. After a brief, intense conversation, the attorney returned to Preston, shaking his head. Whatever offer they had made, Miss Collins had refused it. Your Honor, Preston said, his voice tight with controlled anger. This is highly irregular. Miss Collins was terminated for poor performance. Her testimony would be nothing more than that of a disgruntled former employee. I was fired after I questioned the maintenance prioritization system, Miss Collins stated, firmly approaching the bench despite Value Corp's objections. I have emails proving that Mr. Knight Caldwell explicitly instructed maintenance staff to prioritize white tenants' requests and delay or ignore those from black and Hispanic residents. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Judge Harrington banged his gavel. Order, Miss Collins. Are you willing to testify under oath regarding these allegations? Yes, Your Honor, she replied. I've brought copies of the emails and the internal maintenance tracking spreadsheet that shows how requests were categorized by tenant race. As Miss Collins reached into her bag to retrieve her evidence, one of Preston's attorneys suddenly knocked into her, causing her papers to scatter across the floor. In the confusion that followed, Marcus watched in horror as the attorney deliberately stepped on several key documents while appearing to help gather them. When order was restored, Miss Collins looked dismayed. Your Honor, some of my evidence appears to be missing. The maintenance spreadsheet was right here, but now I can't find it. Convenient, Preston remarked with a thin smile. Perhaps because this alleged spreadsheet never existed. Judge Harrington sighed. Without documentation, Miss Collins, your testimony alone may not be sufficient. Marcus felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. Their strongest potential ally had just been neutralized before their eyes. Bradford, sensing the shift in momentum, pressed their advantage. Your Honor, while these distractions have been entertaining, they don't change the fundamental facts of the case. The Jacksons violated their lease by making unauthorized modifications to their unit. The law is clear on this matter. As Bradford continued his argument, Marcus noticed Miss Collins being quietly escorted from the courtroom by security. No one but him seemed to notice this silencing of their key witness. Have you ever witnessed someone in power use their influence to silence the truth? Comment. Number 1, if you believe the justice system works for everyone equally, or number 2, if you think money and connections often tip the scales unfairly. Don't forget to subscribe to see if Marcus can still turn this case around, despite these devastating setbacks, with their key witness mysteriously removed, and Value Corp's powerful CEO personally intervening. What hidden evidence could possibly save Shanice and Marcus from certain eviction? The answer may surprise you. Judge Harrington shuffled the papers before him, his expression suggesting he was ready to conclude the proceedings. Based on the evidence presented, while there may be some questionable maintenance practices at Westview Heights, the lease violation regarding unauthorized modifications remains undisputed. Therefore, Your Honor, Marcus interrupted, standing up straight, despite his mother's attempt to pull him back. Before you make your decision, there's one more piece of evidence you need to hear. The judge sighed with visible impatience. Young man, while your contributions have been unusual for this court, I believe we've heard sufficient testimony. But you haven't heard Mr. Caldwell admit what he's doing, Marcus persisted. The courtroom fell silent. Even William Preston turned to stare at the small boy standing defiantly before the bench. What did you say? Judge Harrington asked, his hand pausing mid-air as he had been about to bang his gavel. I have a recording of Mr. People Caldwell talking about how they ignore black tenants' maintenance requests on purpose, Marcus stated clearly. He says it's part of their tenant relocation strategy. Bradford leapt to his feet. Objection. Any such recording would be illegally obtained and therefore inadmissible. Actually, Marcus countered, his voice steady. Mr. Caldwell was talking to another property manager in the laundry room, which is a public space in our building. I was there doing my homework when they came in. They didn't see me behind the folding table. And this state is a one-party consent state for recordings in public places where there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. Judge Harrington raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised by the child's legal knowledge. That's a rather sophisticated understanding of recording consent laws for someone your age. I read about it in a book called Know Your Legal Rights from the library, Marcus explained. Mrs. Chen helped me understand the complicated parts. Bradford approached the bench urgently. Your Honor, regardless of how it was obtained, any recording should have been submitted with their other evidence. Introducing it now violates court procedures. It was submitted, Marcus insisted. It was on the USB drive attached to our evidence folder. It's labeled Caldwell Recording in the digital files. The judge turned to his clerk. Was there a USB drive with the Jackson evidence? The clerk nodded. Yes, Your Honor. It was logged into evidence but not included in your briefing materials this morning. He cast a suspicious glance toward the Value Corp attorneys. Judge Harrington's expression darkened. Retrieve that USB drive immediately. As the clerk left to retrieve the evidence, chaos erupted at the Value Corp table. Preston berated Bradford in harsh whispers while frantically texting on his phone. The third attorney attempted to approach the bench, but was waved away by the judge. When the clerk returned with the USB drive, Judge Harrington ordered the courtroom's audio-visual system prepared. Your Honor, Bradford protested, desperately playing unverified recordings without proper authentication would be highly irregular. So is the apparent disappearance of evidence properly submitted to this court, the judge replied coldly. Mr. Bradford, my patience is wearing thin. As the technician prepared the audio, Shanice leaned close to Marcus. How did you get this recording? She whispered. When did this happen? 2 weeks ago, Marcus whispered back. After Mr. Caldwell threatened you about your job. I started bringing my tablet to the laundry room to do homework because I could hear the office staff when they came in to use the coffee machine. I wasn't trying to record anything, but then Mr. Caldwell and another man came in, and when I heard what they were saying, the courtroom speakers crackled to life, interrupting their conversation. Richard Caldwell's distinctive voice filled the room. The East Wing is 90% black and Hispanic tenants. Most have been there for years, paying below market rent. A second voice responded. So how are you handling the transition? Those long-term tenants have rights. Caldwell laughed. On paper, sure, but there are ways around that. Maintenance is the key. White tenants get immediate service. The others go on the permanent back burner. When things get bad enough, they either leave voluntarily, or we evict them for property damage, or unauthorized modifications when they try to fix things themselves. Works every time. Isn't that discriminatory? The second voice asked. Only if you're stupid enough to put it in writing, Caldwell replied. Official policy is first come, first served for maintenance. Reality is whatever we need it to be. Preston calls it tenant profile adjustment in the investor meetings. Sounds better than getting rid of the black folks so we can double the rent. The recording continued for another minute, with Caldwell explicitly describing how they targeted families like the Jacksons who had lived in the building for years. When it finally ended, the courtroom remained in stunned silence. William Preston's face had drained of color. Bradford appeared physically ill. Judge Harrington removed his glasses slowly, his expression unreadable as he processed what he'd just heard. Your Honor, Preston finally began. Value Corp categorically denies. Save it. Judge Harrington interrupted, his tone ice cold. Mr. Preston, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely heard such blatant admission of discriminatory practices. This recording, if authenticated, represents a serious violation of both state and federal housing laws. Marcus stepped forward again. Your Honor, I have the original recording on my tablet with the metadata showing when and where it was made, and I can show you exactly where I was sitting in the laundry room when they came in. Judge Harrington nodded. The court will require the original recording for authentication. But given what we've heard, I'm inclined to find it credible, particularly in light of the other evidence presented today. Bradford, making a last desperate attempt to salvage the situation, attacked from a different angle. Your Honor, even if this recording is authentic, it raises serious questions about the parenting decisions that would allow a 6-year-old child to engage in such activities. Perhaps the real issue here is a lack of proper supervision. Shanice gasped at the implication, but before she could respond, Marcus turned to face Bradford directly. My mom works 2 and sometimes 3 shifts at the hospital to pay our rent. She saves lives every day. She doesn't know I recorded that conversation because she was working a double shift that day to pay the rent that Value Corp keeps raising. If you want to talk about bad decisions, let's talk about how your client deliberately lets black children live with toxic mold because it helps their business plan. A spontaneous burst of applause erupted from the gallery, quickly silenced by the bailiff. Judge Harrington, however, made no attempt to admonish Marcus for his outburst. Instead, he turned to Shanice. Miss Jackson, I believe I understand the situation more clearly now. Your son's methods may be unconventional, but his evidence appears substantial. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened again. Mrs. Washington entered, followed by at least a dozen other residents from Westview Heights, all black and Hispanic families Marcus recognized from his research. Behind them came housing advocate James Turner, who had been working with tenant rights groups across the city. Your Honor, Turner announced, I represent the Westview Heights Tenant Association. We have documentation of identical experiences from 28 additional families, all minorities, all experiencing the exact same pattern described in that recording. Bradford jumped to his feet. Objection. This is turning into a circus. These people aren't parties to this case. On the contrary, Judge Harrington replied, if there is a systemic pattern of discrimination as alleged, their experiences are directly relevant. He turned to James Turner. Mr. Turner, the court will accept your documentation as an amicus brief. Please provide it to the clerk. As the new evidence was being processed, Nicole Washington from the Jefferson Herald slipped out of the courtroom, phone in hand. Within minutes, the first online story about the case appeared. 6-year-old boy exposes alleged housing discrimination ring in dramatic court showdown. The headline spread rapidly across social media platforms, and soon more reporters began arriving at the courthouse. William Preston, noticing this development, attempted to approach Judge Harrington during a brief pause in proceedings. A photographer from the Herald captured the moment, the flash causing both men to turn in surprise. Preston retreated immediately, but the damage was done. The image of the Value Corp CEO apparently attempting to influence the judge would appear on the front page of tomorrow's newspaper. When court resumed after a brief recess, Marcus approached the bench one final time. Your Honor, he said, his young voice now filled with confidence. Section 802 of the Fair Housing Act prohibits interference, coercion, or intimidation against any person exercising their fair housing rights. Value Corp didn't just ignore our maintenance requests because we're black. They threatened my mom's job, vandalized our car, and tried to rush our eviction when we started gathering evidence. He paused, then added with perfect recall, the law says housing practices that have a disparate impact on protected groups are illegal, even if they don't explicitly mention race. Value Corp's maintenance policies have a disparate impact on black families like mine. A stunned murmur swept through the courtroom. Judge Harrington leaned forward. Young man, where exactly did you learn all this? From books and court cases I read online, Marcus replied simply. When something's important, I remember it exactly. My teacher says I have an eidetic memory. That means I can remember things I've seen or read like they're still right in front of me. From the back of the courtroom, a new voice spoke up. Your Honor, if I may. Marcus turned to see Miss Peterson, his first-grade teacher, standing in the gallery. Elena Peterson, Westside Elementary. I'm Marcus's teacher, and I can confirm his exceptional cognitive abilities. His reading comprehension and retention abilities test at a high school level. I've been working with him on an accelerated curriculum this year. Judge Harrington nodded. Thank you, Miss Peterson. That context is helpful. The court clerk approached the bench and whispered something to the judge, who nodded gravely. It has come to the court's attention, Judge Harrington announced, that several similar cases involving Value Corp properties have come before this court in recent months. In light of today's evidence, I've requested those case files for review. He looked directly at William Preston. Mr. Preston, I am deeply troubled by what I've heard today. This case has evolved from a simple eviction, proceeding into something far more concerning. An elderly black woman slowly rose from her seat in the gallery. Your Honor, she said in a wavering voice, I'm Dorothy Williams. I've lived in that neighborhood for 63 years. We built that community when no one else wanted to live there. Now that it's valuable, they want to push us out like we're nothing, like our lives and memories don't matter. Her words hung in the air, the simple truth of them more powerful than any legal argument. Judge Harrington surveyed the courtroom, taking in the faces of the residents, the calculating expressions of the Value Corp team, and finally the determined stance of a 6-year-old boy standing protectively beside his exhausted mother. In that moment, something shifted in the courtroom, a rebalancing of scales that had been unfairly weighted for far too long. The judge cleared his throat, ready to deliver his ruling on a case that had become about far more than a single family's eviction. Before I rule on the immediate matter of the Jackson eviction, Judge Harrington began, his voice carrying an authority that commanded complete silence in the packed courtroom. I believe it's necessary to address the broader context that has emerged during these proceedings. Marcus stood beside his mother, barely breathing, as the judge continued. Young Mr. Jackson has presented this court with evidence suggesting that the maintenance issues in his family's apartment are not isolated incidents, but part of a systematic pattern affecting minority residents throughout Westview Heights. At the Value Corp table, William Preston whispered urgently to his legal team, but the damage had already been done. The recording had revealed their strategy, in the executive's own words, tenant profile adjustment, as a euphemism for racial discrimination. Marcus stepped forward, his tablet in hand. Your Honor, I've analyzed maintenance records for 36 apartments in our building over the past 8 months. He displayed a simple but effective chart showing response times by tenant race. White tenants wait an average of 24 hours for repairs. Black tenants wait an average of 42 days, if they get repairs at all. Judge Harrington examined the chart with interest. And how did you obtain this data, young man? I interviewed residents in the laundry room and by the mailboxes, Marcus explained. I recorded their stories with permission and noted the dates of their maintenance requests. I also took photographs of problems that hadn't been fixed. He swiped to a new screen showing a map of their building with apartments color-coded by both maintenance response times and tenant race. The correlation was unmistakable. Bradford rose to object. Your Honor, this crude analysis hardly constitutes statistical evidence. The child has no training in data science or housing management. Perhaps not, the judge acknowledged, but the pattern is concerning enough to warrant further investigation, particularly in light of Mr. Caldwell's recorded statements about intentional neglect as a strategy. James Turner, the housing advocate, approached the bench with additional documentation. Your Honor, the pattern at Westview Heights is not isolated. We've documented similar practices at 6 other properties acquired by Value Corp in predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods over the past 3 years. He presented a comprehensive report showing how Value Corp's business model appeared to depend on displacing long-term minority residents to renovate properties for higher-income, predominantly white tenants. In each case, the same pattern emerges, Turner explained. Acquisition is followed by deteriorating conditions for minority tenants, ignored maintenance requests, then evictions for property damage or lease violations when residents attempt makeshift repairs themselves. Nicole Washington, the reporter from the Jefferson Herald, had been busily typing on her laptop throughout these revelations. Her first article about the case had already gone live, the headline reading David vs. Juan. Goliath 6-year-old takes on corporate giant in housing discrimination case. As Turner continued presenting evidence, more reporters slipped into the courtroom, drawn by the rapidly spreading story. Marcus noticed Judge Harrington's demeanor changing as the full scope of the situation became clear. What had begun as a routine eviction hearing had evolved into an expose of potentially widespread housing discrimination affecting hundreds of families across the city. Your Honor, Marcus, said his voice steady. Despite the high stakes, gentrification isn't illegal but discrimination island. Value Corp doesn't just want to improve neighborhoods. They want to change who lives in them, and they're breaking the law to do it. The simplicity and clarity of his statement hung in the air, impossible to dismiss. Bradford attempted to regain control of the narrative. Your Honor, these are complicated market forces at work. Property improvement naturally leads to increased values and changing neighborhood demographics. There's no conspiracy here. Judge Harrington fixed Bradford with a skeptical gaze. Mr. Harrington, Bradford, when a company executive is recorded explicitly describing how maintenance requests are prioritized by race as part of a tenant relocation strategy, it stretches credibility to dismiss this as merely market forces at work. From his research, Marcus recalled connections he'd discovered between Value Corp and city development plans. Your Honor, Value Corp purchased buildings in 5 neighborhoods that the city targeted for revitalization in their 23 strategic development plan. They knew property values would increase after public investments in those areas. He pulled up a map showing the correlation between city improvement projects and Value Corp acquisitions. They're using insider knowledge about public projects to target buildings, then pushing out Black and Hispanic families who've lived there for generations. William Preston finally rose to speak, his composure visibly strained. Your Honor, while we acknowledge there may have been some unfortunate management decisions at the local level, Value Corp categorically denies any systematic discrimination policy. Mr. Caldwell's statements, if authentic, represent a rogue employee acting against company values and training. Judge Harrington's expression made it clear he found this explanation unconvincing. Mr. Preston, the recording specifically mentions you referring to these practices as tenant profile adjustment in investor meetings. Are you claiming Mr. Caldwell fabricated this detail? Preston paled slightly. I may have used that term in a different context that was misinterpreted. As this exchange continued, the courtroom doors opened again. The court clerk announced, Your Honor, the clerk from Department B has delivered the case files you requested. Judge Harrington examined the stack of folders with growing concern. In the past 6 months, this court has processed 74 eviction cases from Value Corp properties. 68 involved minority tenants, all with nearly identical allegations of lease violations related to unauthorized repairs or tenant-caused damage. He looked up with a troubled expression. This statistical disparity alone would trigger heightened scrutiny under fair housing standards. Nicole Washington's article had now been updated with these new revelations and was spreading rapidly across social media. The courthouse steps were filling with protesters carrying hastily made signs reading Housing Justice Now and Stop Discriminatory Evictions. Television news vans had begun arriving, setting up for live broadcasts. Inside the courtroom, Marcus felt the momentum shifting decisively. His weeks of research, his careful documentation, his courage in standing up, it was all coming together in ways he couldn't have imagined. The court clerk approached the bench again, whispering something to Judge Harrington, who nodded gravely. The court has received word that the city attorney's office is requesting permission to join these proceedings as an interested party, he announced. Given the potential violations of both state and federal housing laws, I am inclined to grant this request. Bradford jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The city has no standing in what remains a private contract dispute between Value Corp and a tenant. Mr. Bradford, the judge replied sternly, I think we're well past characterizing this as merely a private contract dispute. The evidence suggests potential violations of the Fair Housing Act that affect the public interest. As if on cue, the courtroom doors opened once more, and Assistant City Attorney Maria Gonzalez entered accompanied by 2 colleagues. Your Honor, she began after introducing herself. The city has been monitoring housing complaint patterns and noted a troubling cluster associated with Value Corp properties. Today's revelations accelerate concerns that were already under preliminary investigation. She requested permission to submit an amicus brief detailing the city's interest in the case. Judge Harrington granted her request, immediately further shifting the balance of power in the courtroom. During a brief recess to allow all parties to review the city's submission, Marcus found himself surrounded by supporters. Mrs. Washington from their building squeezed his shoulder. You've done something amazing, child. Something many adults were afraid to do. Mrs. Chen from the library beamed with pride. I knew those legal books would be put to good use, but I never imagined like this. Miss Peterson, his teacher, knelt beside him. Marcus, this is why I've been giving you those extra research assignments. Your mind is extraordinary, but today you've shown your heart is even more special. When court resumed, the atmosphere had transformed completely. What had begun as a David versus Goliath battle between a single family and a corporate giant had evolved into a landmark case with potential ramifications for housing policy throughout the city. Judge Harrington addressed the courtroom with renewed gravity. Before proceeding further, I want to acknowledge something unusual but important. While courts typically rely on testimony from experts and legal professionals, today we have witnessed something remarkable. A 6-year-old child who identified injustice, methodically documented it, researched applicable laws, and articulated his findings with exceptional clarity. He looked directly at Marcus. Young man, your actions exemplify citizenship in its highest form. You saw wrong being done not just to your family but to your community, and you used knowledge as your weapon to fight back. The gallery broke into spontaneous applause, which the judge allowed to continue for several moments before raising his hand for silence. Now, as to the matter before us, based on the evidence presented, I am prepared to rule on the Jackson eviction case. However, I believe the broader issues of potential discriminatory practices require more extensive investigation and possibly additional legal proceedings. William Preston conferred urgently with his legal team, clearly recognizing that the situation had spiraled far beyond a simple eviction defense. Bradford approached the bench. Your Honor, in light of today's developments, ValueCorp would like to propose a settlement regarding the Jackson case, specifically while reserving our position on the broader allegations. Judge Harrington raised an eyebrow. I'm listening, Mr. Bradford. ValueCorp will immediately withdraw the eviction notice against the Jacksons, make all necessary repairs to their unit, and waive rent for 6 months as compensation for their inconvenience. Shanice looked at Marcus questioningly. He shook his head slightly. And what about the other families facing identical situations? Shanice asked, finding her voice. This isn't just about us anymore. Bradford hesitated, clearly unprepared for this response. Preston whispered something to him, and he continued reluctantly. ValueCorp would be willing to review other maintenance situations on a case-by-case basis. That's not good enough, Marcus said firmly. The recording proves this is a system, not individual cases. Everyone deserves the same justice. Judge Harrington nodded thoughtfully. I concur with the young Mr. Jackson. Given the evidence of systematic practices, individualized settlements seem inadequate to address the scope of the potential violations. He turned to Assistant City Attorney Gonzalez. Does the city have a position on this matter? Gonzalez stood. Your Honor, based on the evidence presented today and our ongoing monitoring of housing complaints, the city believes this situation warrants a comprehensive investigation into ValueCorp's practices at all their properties within our jurisdiction. We would oppose any settlement that prevents full disclosure of relevant information. Preston himself finally approached the bench, recognizing the need to personally manage the rapidly deteriorating situation. Your Honor, ValueCorp is committed to fair housing practices. If there have been misunderstandings or inappropriate actions by our management team, we want to correct them immediately. Judge Harrington fixed him with a penetrating gaze. Mr. Preston, characterizing recorded admissions of intentional discrimination as misunderstandings, strikes me as disingenuous at best. This court has heard explicit evidence of policies designed to remove minority tenants through selective neglect of maintenance issues. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. I believe we are looking at potential violations of the Fair Housing Act that could result in significant penalties, both civil and possibly criminal. The courtroom fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of the judge's statement. Marcus looked around at the gathered residents from his building, people whose struggles he had documented, whose stories he had recorded, whose dignity had been assaulted by systematic discrimination disguised as business practices. In that moment, he realized that what had begun as an attempt to save his mother from an unjust eviction had evolved into something much larger, a challenge to an entire system designed to disadvantage people who looked like him. As Judge Harrington prepared to deliver his ruling, Marcus reached for his mother's hand, drawing strength from her touch, just as she drew courage from his extraordinary efforts. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not just as mother and son, but as members of a community that deserved justice. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Harrington cleared his throat, ready to deliver his ruling. Marcus sat beside his mother, his small hand clasped tightly in hers. The journey that had begun with a yellow eviction notice taped to their door had led them here, to a moment that would determine not just their future, but potentially the futures of countless families facing similar discrimination. In the matter of Value Corp Properties versus Jackson, Judge Harrington began, his voice resonating through the packed courtroom. This court finds the following. He adjusted his glasses and continued. First, regarding the specific eviction notice against the Jackson family, the notice is hereby revoked and declared null and void. The evidence clearly establishes that the alleged lease violations were the direct result of Value Corp's discriminatory maintenance practices, not tenant negligence or unauthorized modifications. Shanice squeezed Marcus's hand, tears of relief welling in her eyes. But Judge Harrington wasn't finished. Second, Value Corp Properties is hereby ordered to make all necessary repairs to the Jackson apartment within 7 days, including complete remediation of mold and water damage, replacement of affected materials, and restoration to safe, habitable conditions. He fixed William Preston with a stern gaze. These repairs will be subject to inspection by the City Housing Authority and must meet all applicable building codes. Preston nodded stiffly, his face an expressionless mask. Third, the court finds sufficient evidence of potential Fair Housing Act violations to warrant a preliminary injunction. Value Corp is prohibited from initiating any new eviction proceedings against current tenants at Westview Heights or any other Value Corp property within this jurisdiction until a full investigation of their maintenance and management practices is completed. A murmur of surprise rippled through the courtroom at the scope of the judge's order. Bradford rose to object, but Judge Harrington raised his hand to silence him. Fourth, based on the compelling evidence presented today, including the recorded admissions of discriminatory practices by Value Corp management, I am ordering a comprehensive audit of all maintenance requests and responses across Value Corp properties for the past 24 months, with specific attention to response times categorized by tenant race and ethnicity. The judge turned to the city attorney. Ms. Gonzalez, the court requests that the City Housing Authority conduct this audit with appropriate resources and report their findings within 60 days. Gonzalez nodded. The city will prioritize this investigation, Your Honor. Fifth Judge Harrington continued. Value Corp Properties will establish a remediation fund of $2 million to address deferred maintenance issues in all their properties with priority given to health and safety concerns. Distribution of these funds will be overseen by a court-appointed special master to ensure equitable application. William Preston's composed veneer finally cracked. $2 million, Your Honor. This is a starting point. Mr. Preston, the judge, interrupted firmly. Given the scope of the apparent violations, this amount may well increase once the full audit is complete. Consider this an opportunity to begin making amends for what appears to be a systematic violation of your tenant's civil rights. The judge wasn't finished. Finally, I am referring this matter to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division for investigation of potential criminal violations of federal housing laws. The evidence presented today suggests a level of intentional discrimination that may rise to the threshold for criminal penalties. Preston paled visibly at this announcement. Criminal charges could mean personal liability that corporate shields couldn't protect against. Judge Harrington concluded. This court retains jurisdiction over all aspects of this case pending further proceedings. We are adjourned. As the gavel fell, the courtroom erupted. Residents of Westview Heights embraced each other in tearful celebration. Reporters rushed out to file updates on the landmark ruling. Value Corp's legal team huddled in grim consultation with Preston, whose career now hung in the balance. Amid the commotion, Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers. Mrs. Washington enveloped him in a grandmother's warm hug. You did it, child. You stood up for all of us when no one else would. Mrs. Chen beamed with pride. Your parents raised a remarkable young man, Mrs. Jackson. His mind is exceptional, but his heart is even more so. Nicole Washington from the Jefferson Herald approached with her notebook. Marcus, would you be willing to tell me more about how you gathered all this evidence? Your story could inspire other communities facing similar situations. Before Marcus could respond, a distinguished older man in a suit made his way through the crowd. Mrs. Jackson, Marcus, he said, extending his hand. I'm Benjamin Harris, president of the State Bar Association. What I witnessed today was extraordinary. Our organization would like to recognize Marcus's contribution to justice with our Citizens Justice Award. Shanice watched in amazement as her 6-year-old son, who just weeks ago had been worrying about his science fair project, now stood at the center of a landmark housing discrimination case that would likely set precedents for years to come. 6 months later, the transformation was remarkable. The audit of ValueCorp properties had revealed discrimination even more widespread than initially suspected, leading to a class action lawsuit that resulted in a $25 million settlement for affected families. Richard Caldwell and 2 other property managers faced criminal charges for their role in the discriminatory scheme. William Preston had resigned as CEO, and ValueCorp's board had implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination policies under court supervision. The most significant change came when a community land trust funded in part by the settlement purchased Westview Heights. The new ownership structure ensured that the property would remain affordable for current residents, while preventing the type of predatory practices that had threatened to displace them. Shanice, whose nursing expertise and newfound advocacy skills had impressed many during the proceedings, was offered a position with the housing advocacy group that had initially been too overwhelmed to help them. The role allowed her to help other families facing similar situations while maintaining more regular hours, meaning more time with Marcus. As for Marcus himself, he had become something of a local celebrity. With the support of Miss Peterson and his school principal, he started a youth advocacy program, teaching other children about their rights and how to document problems in their communities. During a ceremony at City Hall, the mayor presented him with a special commendation for civic courage. "What makes Marcus's actions so remarkable," the mayor said during the ceremony, "is not just his extraordinary intelligence, but his understanding that knowledge must be coupled with action. He saw injustice, he documented it methodically, and he stood up against powerful interests to protect not just his family, but his entire community." On a warm Sunday afternoon, Marcus and Shanice hosted a community celebration in the newly renovated common area of Westview Heights. Mrs. Washington had prepared her famous sweet potato pie. Mrs. Jefferson brought her legendary macaroni and cheese. Mr. Turner from the courthouse, who had slipped them that crucial form, allowing Marcus into the courtroom, was there with his family. Mrs. Chen had donated books for a new community library in the building. The atmosphere was one of victory, but also of vigilance. They had won this battle, but the war against housing discrimination continued in communities across the country. As the celebration wound down, Shanice found Marcus sitting quietly on a bench, watching the sunset through newly repaired windows. "Penny, for your thoughts, genius," she asked, sitting beside him. Marcus smiled up at her. "I was just thinking about what Dad used to say about knowledge being our shield." Shanice nodded, her heart warming at the memory of her late husband. "He would be so proud of how you used that shield to protect us, to protect everyone here." "Not just a shield," Marcus corrected thoughtfully. "Knowledge is also a sword. You can use it to fight back against things that aren't fair." Shanice wrapped her arm around her son's shoulders, marveling at the wisdom that seemed so beyond his years. "You're right, baby. And you've taught everyone here how powerful that sword can be when someone is brave enough to use it." In a nearby apartment, another family had just received an eviction notice from a different property management company. The mother, inspired by news stories about Marcus, began carefully documenting every interaction, every maintenance request, every sign of potential discrimination. Her children, following Marcus's example, started helping her organize the evidence. Across the city, other families were doing the same, learning from a 6-year-old boy that justice, while not always easily accessible, was worth fighting for, and that even the youngest among us could lead that fight with courage, determination, and the powerful sword of knowledge. What do you think about Marcus's incredible journey from scared 6-year-old to community hero? Has this story inspired you to stand up against injustice in your own community? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to spread Marcus's inspiring story of courage and determination. Thank you for joining us for this remarkable true story of how one extraordinarily brave child changed not just his own family's future, but an entire community's fight for housing justice. Marcus's journey teaches us that courage knows no age limit. In a world where systemic racism often goes unchallenged, this 6-year-old boy demonstrated that knowledge is both shield and sword against injustice. When faced with discrimination, Marcus didn't just accept it. He methodically documented it, researched laws being violated, and presented irrefutable evidence that could not be dismissed. His story reminds us that discrimination thrives in silence and shadow. By bringing Value Corp's practices into the light through careful documentation and unwavering determination, Marcus exposed a system designed to push black families from their homes under the guise of lease violations. The case teaches us about the power of community. What began as one family's fight expanded to protect an entire building of residents facing similar discrimination. When people unite against injustice, even powerful corporations can be held accountable. Perhaps most importantly, Marcus shows us that waiting for others to fix broken systems sometimes means waiting forever. True change often begins with one person brave enough to stand up and say this is wrong, even when that person is only 6 years old. Justice requires both knowledge of rights and the courage to demand they be respected. Has Marcus's remarkable courage inspired you to stand up against discrimination in your own life? Have you ever witnessed housing discrimination or other racist practices that went unchallenged? Share your experiences in the comments below, and let us know if you would have had the bravery to do what this extraordinary young boy did. If you believe more people need to hear this powerful story of standing up against systemic racism, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of ordinary heroes making extraordinary changes. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need courage to fight injustice in their own community. Remember, as Marcus showed us, sometimes the youngest voices can create the loudest calls for justice. Thank you for watching, and may we all find the courage to document, expose, and challenge discrimination wherever we encounter it.